Gracious and loving God, potter of creation, gardener of our lives, we give you thanks for this day, thanks for this time to rest in your divine love, to discern your work and your call for us. In our time together this morning, may the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So every year for Christmas, Santa got 3 cookies. My siblings and I each would pick one, and 2 of those cookies were different every year, but there was one constant. Every year, Santa got a Fig Newton from me. Fig Newtons are my favorite cookie, and it's funny because I had never seen a fig tree really until college. Fig trees are kind of weird. Right, Reverend Liz noted this with the branch that we have up here, that unlike almost every other fruit-bearing tree, it's hard to see the fruit of a fig tree. Indeed, figs are often hidden by their own leaves, so you have to get really up close and kind of personal to really see what's there. I tell you that, and then I will also tell you that this was one of the hardest sermons that I have written, and I don't really know why. But over the past week, I probably wrote 6,000 to 8,000 words. My sermons are typically 1,200 to 1,500 words. So I kind of wrote a lot, and I think part of the struggle that I had was that our friends at Sanctified Art cut the parable out of its context. So we are going to talk about rest and growth today, but the parable of the fig tree is not taught in a vacuum. It's important that you understand that when this lesson was presented by Jesus, it was shortly after he admonished a crowd of people for their ability to look at the sky and forecast the weather, but not be able to understand the time that they were living in. It's also taught alongside a story arc about repenting and turning toward God. The lesson of the fig tree is really, I think, a conversation about one's relationship with God. It's also a metaphor for Israel, but I digress for that today. I also struggled with writing this sermon because preaching is just hard. There's a delicate balance between comfort and challenge, pushing and pulling, interpreting, reinterpreting, encouraging, imagining, reimagining, and making new. And then there's the layer of concern as to whether or not people will leave this place with another tool in their meaning-making toolbox. I think you guys all show up here for something different. Indeed, some of you do want to be challenged. Others had a hard week and you're looking for comfort. Some are seeking prophecy in the face of great adversity. On a personal note, I think that I've dabbled in the prophetic and challenge a bit much lately. And amid all that's happening in the world, a sense of great worry and concern for a lot of people whom I love, and a lot of worry and concern for people who I don't even know, amid a sense of losing control and some feeling of not quite doing enough to meet the moment. I think that what I've needed and what I offer to you this morning is a sense of comfort and a pat on the back. We live in a world that doesn't really want us to rest, not on our days off, not in retirement, really not ever. Our world constantly demands our labor in service of growth. And rest often makes us uncomfortable. I don't think it's because we are rejecting the need to rest so much as it's because we're rejecting the need to just be present in the moment. I really love and appreciate our Lenten devotionals group because as we talked about the struggle we had with the devotions this week, someone raised the idea that perhaps if we acknowledge that the fig tree is a symbol of covenant between the people of God and God, then perhaps this year-long pause that the gardener says in Office of the Farmer isn't just a pause to add more soil around the tree, but is really a pause for us to rest in our covenant, to rest in our relationship with God. I think that person's comment is right. I think really, as I thought about the fig tree, I thought about this particular congregation. In one of my first sermons here, I shared that I thought a lot about the data that we're collecting about religion, particularly churches. I think a lot of that is just wrong. I think that they are measuring faith in institutions more so than interest in institutions. And so you get these surveys that say, nobody goes to church. And they take that to then say, nobody wants to follow in the ways or teachings of Jesus Christ. And I think their methodology just happens to be really, really wrong, and we keep repeating that across every single survey. And what's really happening is that people don't trust the institution of churches, so they don't go to the institution. But they still do a lot of things that follow in the ways and teachings of Christ. I think a lot of people out there are still looking for ways to take rests in their yearning, rests in their longing for a place and a people with whom they can simply make meaning of the world. I have been with you all for almost exactly 2 years and 6 months. In that time, I've heard a lot about what you hope and dream about for this particular community of faith. As an aside, I hope that you share many of those thoughts during our Lenten lunches, which happen every Sunday after service. But I will say, as someone who is just generally a restless person, I've heard a lot from people who say, we need to grow. We need more people. And I often respond to that with a sort of like, okay, that'd be nice. But in my head, I keep thinking, what's the rush? And more recently, I've thought, do you not see what's happening around you? On the second Sunday of March in 2023, there were 40 people sitting inside this room. 25 were online. A year later, on that same Sunday, second Sunday of March, there were 47 people sitting in this room, with 20 online. This year, the second Sunday of March 9th, the first Sunday in Lent, I got up to preach, and before I prayed, I silently thanked God for what I saw. Because on the second Sunday of March, the first Sunday in Lent, there were 82 people in this room, with 24 online. If you're online, you have a disadvantage because I think we have a room of mostly Baptists because everyone sits towards the back. And so your camera angle often cannot capture that most of these pews have 2, if not 3, or more people seated in them. If you're sitting amongst the crowd, you often always look forward, so you miss the people who are sitting behind you. That Sunday, March 9th, was the first Sunday in at least 3 years, if not the first Sunday since COVID, when there were more than 100 people in worship at this church, and it was not a funeral, nor a wedding, nor a special service. You can clap for that. This is meant to be a pat on the back for you. I want to be clear that I don't believe that this is just a numbers game, but I do think that numbers can help us tell a story. I think that numbers help us fill in gaps where our own subjectivity might lead us astray. For the first year that I was here, I was often the youngest person in the room. That's not true anymore. And it's not just things happening in worship on Sunday mornings, it's things happening all over the place at this church. In relatively short order, you have become the home of the Atlanta Freedom Bands, the Interfaith Children's Movement, a quilting society, and a mushroom club. You welcomed 12 new people as members of this church in just 14 months, and there's another dozen folks who really enjoy coming here, but they've said, Thomas, I just don't like the concept of membership. I get it. You've hosted 2 large choral concerts for the Trey Clegg Singers, welcoming in more than 600 people across both concerts. Many of them didn't even know this church existed before they walked in the doors for those performances. You are making more sandwiches on Sandwich Sundays. Lena's Place is raising more money for its nonprofit causes each month. Thanks to the work of our CE board, both past and present, we have doubled, and on some Sundays, triple the number of people participating in a faith formation class, group, or program. Indeed, all throughout Advent, 1 in 4 people who came to church were here an hour early to sit in some Sunday school class. 25%. Churches would do a lot to hit that number. You have welcomed in the pitter-patter and squeals and laughter of children in kids' space, and you have taken seriously something that I have raised to you before that I take seriously, and that's the preamble to the UCC's Constitution. There's a note there very clear that says that we affirm the responsibility of this church in each generation to make this faith its own in reality of worship, in honesty of thought and expression, and in purity of heart before God. All the things that you were doing, you were helping make this church and this faith its own. Not necessarily as it has been, certainly taking some things from that, but I think seriously looking towards a day where the work that you're doing aligns with the call of this generation, not so much by age, but the era that we might happen to be in. Even Plymouth Harbor, I think folks honestly didn't know what would happen with that program after COVID. They are now open 4 days a week. So not just Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There are many, many people who walk into that fellowship hall every single day and say, thank God for this program, because this means that my husband, my sister, my partner, my spouse, this person gets some care that they need, and it's because of ministries of this congregation, ministries that you all looked at and said, we're going to do this again. Even with COVID, even without having a director, when you said you were going to do the program again, you said, we're going to do this again. I offer all this to you because as I said when I started the sermon, I think that with the way the world is, we hear a lot of things about what we should do, how we should do it. We get a lot of messaging about things that aren't right, aren't working well, that could be different. Sometimes we just need to hear, good job. Sometimes you just need to have a pat on the back and recognition of the things that you are doing, and you need to be able to step back and maybe step up like a fig tree, look beyond the leaves and see the fruit that you are bearing. Look around this room just for a moment. We're going to do one quick thing. If you've been coming to this church for fewer than 4 years, will you just raise your hand? I'm not sure our camera angles are going to capture all the hands that were up, but I think this is really important. Because there are a lot of churches out there in the world, a lot of churches in this country, when they talk about who comes to their church, what they say is, 90% of us have been here for 20 plus years, and we love it. And that's well and good. That's wonderful. But what you just saw in this room is that nearly half the people here today first showed up less than 4 years ago. That they took the chance to drive up that hill or narrow between the neighborhood back there and walk into this place, and this became a sense and a place of home for them. Right, fig trees are really, really weird because you got to keep constantly caring for them, pruning them, right? Searching for the fruit that's being born. It's weird. I think churches are like that too. There are ups, there are downs, there are seasons where there's a bountiful, bountiful harvest, and seasons where you're like, what the heck just happened here? But if we take seriously the idea that fig trees are also a metaphor for our relationship with our faith, with our God, with the teachings that we hope might help us make meaning of this world, might help us live a better life, then maybe, just maybe, you might see that what you're pouring into, right, that soil that you are laying down, it's not just soil. It's not just fertilizer. It's your time. It's your talent. It's your treasure. It is indeed your own sense of faith of what might be possible in this place. And if you do that frequently enough, if you do that intentionally enough, you end up with a really beautiful, bountiful harvest. This is, again, a pat on the back. It is a job well done. It's not, your work is over. But it is meant to be a moment where I invite you today and perhaps this week to simply rest. Rest in your covenant with this community of faith. Rest in your covenant with one another. Rest in your covenant with God and with Jesus, thinking about how you might make meaning of this world. And in that rest, think about the possibilities for growth that might have yet to be untapped, understood, or even discovered. I think this congregation is much like the fig tree. And so I think the invitation for you today, not a challenge, not a chore, but an invitation to simply rest. Consider a bit more about how you might pour into this place, how you might look at the soil around this place and say there's a little bit more that we can add in here, in the hopes that when we part the leaves, we'll see more figs. I think, too, the hymn that we have sung all throughout Lent, hopefully you've caught on that there's one repeating hymn this season. I think its lyrics speak a lot to this lesson and also to things that are happening here. It's a covenant in its own way. I need you. You need me. We are all a part of God's body. Stand with me. Come be with me. All of those words together, I think, making real the promise, the kingdom, the good news of Jesus Christ and God. My prayer for you this morning is not a prayer of my own. It's a prayer written by Cole Arthur Riley. She is the author of This Here Flesh, the founder of Black Liturgies, and for a time was serving as sort of the spiritual teacher in residence at Cornell University. Rested God, we want more than a life lived exhausted. That you have woven healing rhythms of rest into our minds and bodies reminds us we are worthy of habitual restoration. Remind us that when we pause or rest, we are restoring not only our own bodies, but the very condition of a world held captive by greed and utility. We grow weary of societies who view us as more machine than human, more product than soul. The fear that we won't survive without overworking stalks our days. Liberate us from the depraved socioeconomic structures that require that the poor and vulnerable sacrifice their own rest at the altar of survival and opportunity. Remind us that the beauty and paradox of our humanness is that we were made to close our eyes so that we might see. That, my siblings, is my prayer for you this day, that you might on this day simply close your eyes and open them again to what's happening in the midst of this place. Amid tension, turmoil, adversity, oppression, all the things happening in the world, it turns out that folks keep showing up here. And every single week, someone new shows up here. And they choose again and again and again to keep coming back. There's a lot happening in the world. There's a lot that's demanding your attention and your time, and I hope that in the rush of things that are changing in the world, you acknowledge the changes happening here, that you are actively a part of, that you are actively a part of growth, maybe not just for this place, but also for folks who have spent a long time, I think, searching for a place where they can make meaning of the world. Searching for a place that I think takes seriously the teachings of Jesus and says that the Bible is important and has really important things to teach us, but that's not the only way for us to make meaning of what's happening in the world, that Jesus offered us a lot more in between the lines that tells us how we can live this life, not just for ourselves, but with and alongside others. So again, my siblings, today I invite you to rest in this covenant, rest in your faith, and look towards growth. Amen.